That's a little too bright on the one side.
I'm going to start live streaming. It's going to take a minute for it to get up there. How about that? You're not up there yet. It's just the slide. But be careful what you say on the audio.
Okay. That's not good at all. That really sucks.
Ready? I can hear you. No, it's fine. Ready?
Yeah.
So, hey everybody, can you hear us?
We'll assume as much. I see lights flashing across this little box. Welcome everybody to tonight's live stream. We'll be on for about an hour. I welcome all of your questions, except for the ones that I can't answer. Oh, there's one of those already. Just wanted to hear your predictions. Can you scroll that down a little? Just wanted to hear. Right there. Just wanted to hear your predictions regarding the next 12 months in Australia, particularly Queensland and Tasmania. I suspect things will continue much like they have been. It would not surprise me at all if the United States has, if the world, in fact, has not experienced sufficient reduction in industrial activity to trigger the aerosol masking effect, leading to an abrupt global average rise in temperature. I think that has already happened, and as a consequence, I suspect we will see crop production profoundly reduced for corn, maize, and also soybeans this fall, and that could have a significant impact on the stock markets already. If we use the same metrics for the economy that we did back in the day, already the United States and Europe are in worse economic conditions than during the Great Depression in the early 1930s, following the crash in 1929. So I'm not sure about a blue ocean event. I'd give it 50-50 at this chance, and I'd also give a pretty good likelihood that there will be significant crop failure. So either one of those spells the near-term demise of habitat for our favorite species. We're currently at more than 2 degrees C above the 1750 baseline, as I pointed out in a few of my recent peer-reviewed articles. You can find all those at guymcpherson.com. Today I want to talk a little bit about habitat. I've talked very briefly and superficially about habitat on various speaking tours, but I haven't gone into any details. So I'll start with the kind of definition that you can find in an online dictionary. Habitat is the natural home or environment of a plant, animal, or other organism. It provides the organisms that live there in the habitat with food, water, shelter, and space to survive. So that's a relatively simple definition. The one I used on tour repeatedly is the place where an organism typically lives, grows, and reproduces. So that's a simple version. From a conservation biology perspective, habitat is defined as the physical and biological surroundings of an organism, or more precisely as areas, sites, depending on how specific you want to get, having appropriate levels of the biotic and abiotic features required by a species for survival and reproduction. So what's biotic and abiotic? Biotic means just relating to or referring to living organisms. Abiotic is relating to non-living organisms. And that sounds simple enough, but it's actually very difficult to distinguish between the two, living and non-living. How would you describe soil, for example? Most people would say that soil is dirt, so it's not alive. But in fact, in any given location, there are probably more species in a typical cubic meter just below ground than there are in many hectares above ground. So soil is where the action is. There's a lot of life in the soil, and that life, that interaction between life and non-living compounds, explains almost everything we need to know about ecosystem function. So on the one hand, habitat is relatively easy to define. On the other hand, I've sat in on graduate courses that discussed habitat for an entire semester, 2 hours a week, and generated more questions than answers. I've already mentioned in my writing and in my speaking, oh yes, Mm-hmm. Oh, you answered that question.
Say it out loud because
Okay.
it helps with the video.
Say it out loud. Thank you, Maria. I very much appreciate your emoji and also the donation.
Yay!
The only project that I think will have the potential for continuing habitat for human animals on Earth is the project being headed up by Dr. Ye Tao at Harvard University's Roland Institute. And you can find his contact information. You can ask him for information and he's generally willing to provide information to just about anybody. And especially if you can find somebody with Jeff Bezos style money to hook him up with, that would be particularly welcome, because at this point our time is very, very short, and the MEERS project, MEERS, which is an acronym, the MEERS project is the only one I've seen that I believe gives us any potential for stabilizing or reducing global average temperature. So that's important. Thank you, Chad, for your donation. I appreciate it. And Pauline thanks you for being able to buy a beer and put her feet up. I don't think she's going to do the latter, though. No rest for you. All right, with respect to habitat, there's a paper by Quintero and Weens, that's John Weens, in 2013 in Ecology Letters titled Rates of Projected Climate Change Dramatically Exceed Past Rates of Climate Niche Evolution Among Vertebrate Species. Based on IPC-style gradualism, that is, looking forward to 2100, and again, this paper is in 2013, so it's quite old at this point. So going back to that 2013 paper and projecting forward using the IPCC's gradualism of a very modest increase in global average temperature between 2013 and 2100, Quintero and Weens found that the rate of temperature rise would outstrip the ability of vertebrates to keep pace by a factor of 10,000 times. 10,000 times. So the climate is changing too fast by a factor of 10,000 times with respect to the ability of vertebrates to keep up. How about mammals? Well, in 2018, just a couple of years ago, Davis and colleagues, in a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the U.S., titled Diversity Will Take Millions of Years to Recover from the Current Biodiversity Crisis. Yes, and the title pretty much says it all. Diversity, specifically mammal diversity, will take millions of years to recover from the current biodiversity crisis, and that again is underplaying the magnitude of the biodiversity crisis, otherwise known as the ongoing mass extinction event. So if vertebrates are losing habitat and can't keep up by some 10,000 years, by a factor of 10,000 times, vertebrates are adapting 10,000 times too slowly to keep up with the very slow rates of change projected by the IPCC. And in addition to that, mammals can't keep up, and then you realize that humans are vertebrate mammals, and it does not look promising. Why has the last ice age not caused a mass extinction? How low the temperature must be in order to be So the question is, why has the last ice age not caused a mass extinction? How low must the temperature be in order to be dangerous to life on Earth? And in the last 2 billion years, Earth has not achieved a sufficiently low temperature to cause a mass extinction event, because the rate of change going into an ice age has been slow, and there's a lot of organisms on Earth that are particularly well adapted to cold temperatures. Things like vertebrate mammals, for example, that tend to be hairy and have other adaptations to deal with cold weather. So the temperature during ice age is 12 degrees, is typically about 12 degrees Celsius. That's a global average temperature. So it's not exactly a ball of ice. Ice ages occur when the global average temperature is about 12 degrees Celsius, about 54 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not ice everywhere. It's ice at the poles and into the temperate regions from the north and south pole of the planet. But the equator harbors considerable biological diversity, which allows for a source for organisms to spread from there. So there's plenty of room during an ice age for life on Earth. The relatively rapid increases in temperature are the ones that are particularly problematic, that lead to mass extinction events. And mostly that's what underlies mass extinction events, is those abrupt heating events. There's an occasional exception. For example, rapid cooling events as a result of asteroid impact or substantial volcanic activity. And both of those cause a shading, we'll call it a profound increase in the aerosol masking effect, that causes very rapid cooling of the planet. Oh, Amy asked a question about Dr. Judy Mikovitz, who's clearly doing her job of distracting and dividing the masses. She's the one who thinks that the virus is no big deal. Well, guess what? There's somebody sitting here beside me who had extreme symptoms of the virus for a month. We've known people who nearly died, and there are now more than 150,000 people in the United States who have died from the virus. So Dr. Judy Mikovitz is not even remotely a reliable source on the virus or anything else. She writes, in this current age of dark science, both the revolutionary and the conservative are exiled. The only ones left are the liars, the mercenaries, and the cowards. Yeah, right. I think I'm still left. I think you're still left. I wouldn't call me or you a liar, a mercenary, or a coward. So those are my thoughts on somebody I think is doing a remarkable job providing misinformation, outright lying to people about the importance of the ongoing pandemic. By the way, I almost never hear about anybody talking about a second wave or a third wave. That's the previous pandemics have always had second and third waves, typically more severe than the first wave, but I don't hear a lot of conversation about that. Karina asks, where can I find the paper referencing how hot the planet can get in the next few decades? There are several papers on that particular topic. Sam Coran at the Arctic News blog posted something, I think it was July 15th, 2016, indicating how hot it could get, about 10 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. And Sam Coran has consequently followed up and tacked on, as a result of another self-reinforcing feedback loop, has tacked on an additional 8 degrees C. In the peer-reviewed literature, I don't know where to send you besides my papers, all of which are linked in most of the recent posts at GuyMcPherson.com. Oh, somebody asked about CO2 levels, high CO2 levels, and how they affect brain function. Let's see. I read something about this many years ago and posted it in the climate change summary and update in the blog. Basically, high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere cause cognition to slow. And that's putting it mildly. So, too much CO2 makes us stupid. And that's supported by peer-reviewed literature. And I don't hear much about it. And I think, for the most part, this problem would arise in cities, not in remote islands or out in the woods, for example, but rather in cities where carbon dioxide concentrations tend to be significantly higher than they are in general. So one of the reasons carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is measured at Mauna Loa is because that's a United States laboratory facility, and that's where Charles Keeling was working, and he was interested in the topic, so he started taking measurements. And the reason that they're maintained there, that they retain that as a study site, is because it's very remote. There's not cities around that would artificially elevate carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, carbon monoxide in the atmosphere as a result of industrial activity. Mauna Loa is in Hawaii, so it's quite isolated compared to the centers of industry. So that's why it's continues to be measured there. It's measured in a few other places around the planet as well, but that's the place with the longest record, dating back to the 1950s, as I recall. Do you see the up-and-coming eviction and foreclosure situation and the downturn in the GDP causing even more of a reduction in the aerosol masking? So more warming and quicker changes. Yes, I think so. And it's really important to keep in mind the timing. So we were very lucky that the industrial activity slowed initially in China in late winter and early spring, and then spread to India and then throughout large areas in Eurasia and North America. We were really lucky that that happened when plants were dormant or were just coming out of dormancy. Now we're in the crop season, though. We're verging on the crop harvest season for the major crops produced in the northern hemisphere, soybeans and corn. So this is when we would expect to see a profound impact of temperatures past and ongoing on plant life, on ecology, including trees in nature, in relatively natural ecosystems, as well as with crops that are being harvested to maintain the settled living arrangements. Joey mentioned that you had referenced a paper in your long essay about more than 20 degrees heating, more than what Sam Cran is posting. Yes, that's correct. And that much more, in fact, enough to boil away the oceans. And that's in the long essay. I haven't looked at that in more than 5 years, so you can find it easier than I can. That's an interesting question. Do you worry about growing in plastic pots? I've never grown in a plastic pot.
That's for me.
Oh, do you worry about growing in plastic pots?
I don't. I grow in
Is
plastic pots.
Is that going to affect the shape of your ear?
No, you can grow watermelon in a pot, and it will grow into the shape of the pot. Did you know that?
Of course. I know things. 3 or 4 of them. I think she's talking about pots. Real pots. Not pots that you use to put around fruit to shape it into a silly face or whatever. So are you going to answer that question?
I did already.
Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. Please explain how carbon dioxide or car exhaust changes into carbon dioxide. I've never understood that. Cars emit carbon monoxide, but somehow it changes to CO2, carbon dioxide, with lots of question marks. Yeah, it does that. There's a lot of things I don't know.
That sounds like a chemistry question.
This is one. I strongly suspect that the carbon monoxide, which is relatively unstable, connects with oxygen in the atmosphere and then becomes carbon dioxide, CO2 instead of CO. But that's just a guess. I know who knows. Your favorite search engine knows. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer to that question off the top of my head. Would you recommend stocking up 5 weeks habitat collapse? Yes. In fact, that's what we're doing on this property. Is we have sufficient really nasty dried food in cans and a really small water supply sufficient to keep us alive for a few weeks. I don't know how long, but a few weeks. Because I suspect if society breaks down for longer than that few weeks, that I don't want to live here. That will be sufficient to trigger the aerosol masking effect, to at least diminish the aerosol masking effect sufficiently to cause Earth to be uninhabitable by human beings. And I'm not interested in persisting for another few months in what is rapidly becoming a dead planet, with the not only the overheating, the loss of habitat for many organisms. Remember, we're in the midst of a mass extinction event, but also the catastrophic, uncontrolled meltdown of nuclear power plants, some of which obviously are near here. So I don't want to spend my final days bathing in ionizing radiation and wondering if my neighbor is going to shoot me for my potatoes. That's just me. Obviously, that's personal. Your mileage may vary. So what we're doing here is storing the kind of food that we stored when I was a kid. And it was a 3-hour drive to the grocery store, and we would go once a month. So under those conditions, and given the harsh winters of northern Idaho, we always had plenty of food stored on the shelves and in the freezer. And so we're doing the same thing here. We have a deep chest freezer. We have quite a bit of canned goods. We have enough food to last a few weeks. And I think that's an intelligent route to pursue, just as it was basically a matter of not necessarily life or death in the small town of Weippe, Idaho when I was growing up, but at the very least of not having to inconvenience your neighbors when you ran out of food and the roads were closed, so you couldn't get to the city that had grocery stores 3 hours drive away. So I just think it makes a lot of sense to store enough food so that if the supply chain breaks for a week or two, that you can still get along okay.
Did you answer those up there? This one?
Yes.
And how about the CO2?
CO2 makes fruit sweeter, destroys micronutrients.
Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that. So I'm not even going to comment, even though the comment is in all caps. I still don't know anything about it.
Malachi's yelling. So, we plant nothing.
Site for checking methane levels in the atmosphere now? Fine question. There are a few places. Mauna Loa is one of them, and I strongly suspect you can just type in atmospheric methane at your favorite search engine and have it pop up. There's one in Japan. There's one in representing the European Union, and there's Monolo. So there's a few of them out there, and I don't check it every day or even every week anymore. But last I saw, atmospheric methane was verging on 2,000 parts per billion, about 200 parts per million. And given the CO2 equivalency of at least 100, probably more than 150 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, that translates to approximately 300 parts per million carbon dioxide equivalent, minimum 200 parts per million equivalent, which tacked on to the current 417 or so parts per million carbon dioxide comes out to more than 600 parts per million CO2 equivalent, just taking into account those two greenhouse gases alone. Could detonations of atomic bombs be a solution to the problem? Nuclear winter? Well, that's a happy thought. It would surprise me very much. Look at the human ability to control the environment so far. We don't have a good record. So, could atomic bombs cool the planet? Maybe. To what level? For how long? Accelerating the ionizing radiation in the atmosphere doesn't sound like a very good idea to me. And I don't think anybody has probably worked out how many atomic bombs and how frequently we would need to blow them up to reduce the planetary temperature. But maybe. There's a lot of things I don't know. Well, at least 3. Oh, no, I know those. Never mind.
People talk about geoengineering and chemtrailing and all that stuff that's trying to control the environment.
Mm-hmm.
But people can't even control hurricanes that are making landfalls. I mean, just like,
Right. Even though there's a certain shadowy figure in the chemtrail community, geoengineering community rather, who claims that all of those hurricanes are being controlled, are being created by geoengineering. I think that's ridiculous. We can't even figure out how to make lunch.
or hold an election.
Sorry, no offense, people, but the mass of humanity has never proven itself to be all that swift. Yes, methane in the atmosphere is going exponential, Joey. It's at least 5 times more than previous. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, let's see, it was about 750 parts per million in the atmosphere. Best guess. And just as best guess for carbon dioxide was around 280 parts per million. And that's why James Hansen was arguing many years ago to get carbon dioxide down to 280 parts per million. He said, absolute worst case scenario, we had to get it to 350 parts per million. And thus was born the great distraction group funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, 350.org. But we're not going back to 350. The heating associated with the current level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is locked in for at least the next 1,000 years. That, according to a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in, maybe February 2012, also mentioned in the long essay, Climate Change Summary and Update. Thank you, Delana. 68 years old and purposely did not have children because I took geology in 1972 to 1973 and learned about the pending climate crisis. You were not my teacher, but I wish you had been. I wish I had been your teacher too. However, I was 12 in 1972, so I might not have been particularly good at it. I tried to teach my sister when I was 6 years old and she was 4.5. I tried to teach her how to read. That didn't go well. Yes, Michael Rupert did us all an enormous favor in his life of service with the documentary Collapse with Chris Smith and much of his other work, including the radio show Lifeboat Hour. Why would you apply collective blame for our predicament instead of focusing on the psychopaths and narcissists who excel under capitalism and have no aversion to risk? I don't apply collective blame. I don't apply blame at all. One of my taglines is no blame, no shame. At the age of extinction, only love remains. I'm not trying to blame anybody. We were born into this set of living arrangements. We didn't know any better. And the first peer-reviewed paper on the aerosol masking effect I know about by Anders Angstrom, published in 1929, indicates about the same level of aerosol masking as Hansen and colleagues pointed out in a paper in December 2011. That tells me that terminating or slowing industrial activity in the 1920s would not have helped and perhaps would have driven our extinction shortly thereafter, not to mention the extinction of considerable other species on Earth. Don't you think the planet is warming because of the uses of spent uranium in weapons? No. Methane clathrates released during Deepwater Horizon? No. And 3, continued release of toxic waste by Fukushima? No. I don't think any of those account for a significant increase in the global average temperature. We know that carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere have contributed greatly to planetary warming, along with other greenhouse gases. And perhaps spent uranium in weapons, which I've never heard of as a warming agent for the atmosphere, perhaps some release of methane clathrates during Deepwater Horizon, which again I've never heard about, and perhaps continued release of toxic waste by Fukushima, which I've never heard about. Perhaps those combined contribute a small amount to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but it would surprise me if it was quite significant. Have I said anything today about the research by Dr. Ye Tao, which brought up in yesterday's morning's headlines? Yes, but only once. I think you can find Ye Tao and by going to the Rowland Institute, ROWLAND at Harvard, and keep up with his work there. He has a dozen or 15 undergraduate students volunteering their time to work on that project this summer, which is very impressive, I think. And he's an engineer of great intellect who I think is heading up the only project that has a snowball's chance in hell of slowing or stabilizing global average temperature. Thank you, Suzanne, for joining as a climate defender. Chad asks, do you think we will see anyone pick up your message and take it mainstream? No. Or maybe help us with a softer landing when the collapse happens? No. To maybe help us with a softer landing when the collapse happens? No. Look what happened to me when I tried to go mainstream. There was a massive, I was Me Too'd before anybody heard of Me Too. I was the test case to see if Me Too would work. And it worked brilliantly. It completely removed me from community service. Many people think I'm a horrible person now because of made up Facebook chat messages. And as a consequence, there have been many blog posts written about me and many talks given explaining that I'm one of the most horrible people on the planet. And in addition, when I tried to tour over the course of the last few years, the figures heading up that defamation campaign would send an email message to my host and organizer and explain that I'm a horrible person, and that ended up canceling a few tours and several interviews with corporate media outlets. So you think anybody's going to pick up the message at this point and take it to the mainstream media? No. Nobody's going to do that because they aren't stupid and they saw what happened to me. And in addition, the mainstream media are not interested. The corporate media are not interested in telling the truth on this or almost any other subject. Thank you, Hans, for your generosity. Generosity? I don't think that's a word. So, no, I don't think anybody's going to take up the charge at this point. I think I've done all I could. I was on a few programs with the corporate media, and look where that got us. I've been buried. Thank you, Maureen. I love the headlines too. I should point out that that was Pauline's idea, so she gets the credit. If it goes badly, I get the blame. I covered that. Oh, the methane is stored in a variety of ways, but most notably the methane is stored in permafrost and as clathrates by degradation of biotic material, living material, mostly plants. And that plant life gets decomposes over time and gets stored when cold enough. Then when it gets warm, that decomposed and continuing to decompose material is released as methane. So that's just biology for you, becoming an abiotic factor. So it starts out biotic, and there's another example of how interconnected the two are. It's methane itself is non-living. It's CH4, but it comes from decomposing formerly living material. There's also another form of methane that is actually stored in the Earth's crust. I don't have any idea how it got there. So, sorry about that. Do you think social media is in a way its own feedback loop? Yes, absolutely. I was on social media, all of the main ones, trying to get my message out. It didn't move the needle one bit. It created an enormous amount of toxicity and argumentation and people presenting their opinions, and it continues to, as I understand it. I've been off of social media for about 2 weeks now, and it's such a lovely experience. Yes, very few people appreciate a whistleblower, or as Heinlein said, being right too soon is socially unacceptable. Yeah, I think I was in that category of being right too soon, and it certainly was socially unacceptable.
Chelsea Manning knows too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of people out there who have been in the whistleblower position and it didn't work out well. Have you seen any data to confirm your predictions about this year's crop failures? Not on crop production, no. there's abundant evidence regarding the reduction in the reduction in industrial activity, and also the local and regional increases in temperature as a consequence. So will it lead to crop failure this year? I can't imagine how it couldn't. If it doesn't, that'd be great. I would love that. I would love to have another year or 2 or 6 in which we have this set of living arrangements that we consider normal. Excuse me. That's a fine question. Many people can't grasp how big of a difference small increases in global average temperature can have. Is there a way to somehow better explain this by an example that is easy to understand? So this is one I've used on tour a few times. Our typical temperature of our bodies is 98.6 degrees. That's 37 degrees Celsius, I believe. But if you raise your body temperature by 2 degrees Celsius, that's 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, you're now at 39 degrees Celsius, or 3.6, 98.6, 99.2 plus 2, 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's bad. You're not going to be comfortable at all. With a 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase in your body, you got a fever. You got a serious fever, and it's not going to kill you if it goes away. But what if it doesn't? What if it hangs on for months, for years? What if it only gets worse? What if the temperature continues to go up in your body? You're going to be miserable. Ultimately, organs will fail. As a result, your body organs will fail. So that's the best example I've been able to come up with. Is imagine Earth as a human body. That's the analog. And what happens when our human bodies experience a 3.6 degree Fahrenheit temperature rise? That's a big number. Or 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise. That's a big number. Are we experiencing any effects of the hurricane? Not yet. It's projected to the eye of the storm is projected to be just east of us offshore tomorrow mid-afternoon. So that's, what is it, about, what time is it?
It's 6:44.
So that's in about 20 or 22 hours. We should be feeling the maximum impact of the hurricane that has an unpronounceable name. I think it's Eioiosis. Is that it?
The hurricane will come tomorrow.
Yeah, is it called Eioiosis?
Isaias.
Oh, that's a farm song I was thinking of.
And they keep saying Isaias.
No wonder I'm confused.
Say Isaias.
What do you think we will see over the next 4 years? That's a fine question, Chad. I can't imagine we don't avoid a significant decline in industrial activity over the course of the next 4 years, sufficient to trigger the aerosol masking effect, and therefore cause the demise of this set of living arrangements. I can't imagine we can avoid that over the course of the next 4 years, but I've thought that before in years past, so maybe I'll be incorrect, and I certainly would appreciate that. I would love to be incorrect. We just can't forestall the inevitable forever, and if we get through this year, then do we get through next year's crop season, given that the temperature continues to rise? Remember, the maximum heating resulting from carbon dioxide released today doesn't occur until 10 years from now, or maybe a little longer. In any event, we have triggered abrupt, irreversible climate change. Things are going to get worse. They're not going to get better. Could we not engineer structures or technology that does the opposite of a greenhouse gas effect? Yes, Suzanne. This is the whole point of the project headed by Dr. Ye Tao at the Roland Institute at Harvard. So please look into that if you don't mind. If temperature goes up, should we squeeze the trigger? What trigger? We squeezed the trigger a long time ago. We're firing a Gatling gun at our own heads. If you mean the individual trigger to take your own life, I'm not going to give you advice about that. I got the deep state chasing after my ass already. I don't need to say anything about that. People used to, when we were allowed to tour before the coronavirus outbreak, people would come up to me. It was typical for me. I'm half an hour early for the presentation I'm going to give, setting up the laptop and trying to get the PowerPoint to show on the screen and so forth. And somebody comes up and says, "So, when are you going to kill yourself?" No, people would actually ask this question. I don't even know you, and you ask me when I'm going to kill myself? So, that's a silly question. Could we carve out underground homes and only come out at night because it's too hot during the day? Will it be that hot all day? The problem, again, is habitat, which is how I started this little session. If we don't have a habitat, we are going to die. Period. End of story. So we can live underground. We can live in a cave for a while. Where we're going to grow food. We depend upon an enormous number of species to get us through the day, every single day. And by going into a cave and ignoring the living planet, and by the way, when we all go into a cave, obviously nobody's attending to the nuclear power plants, so you've just triggered the catastrophic meltdown of several hundred nuclear power plants. Also, because now we're all in a cave, apparently industrial activity has been reduced to zero. So the ongoing mass extinction event just heated up to destroy all life on Earth with amazing rapidity. So I don't think a cave is a good idea. Maybe you could explain... Oh, wait. Maybe you can explain the wet bulb temperature. Have you got that graph? That chart?
There it is.
This chart used on today's daily video? Yesterday's. Yesterday's daily video, which you can find at the top of the page at naturebatslast, GuyMcPherson.com. And I explain in some detail the lethal wet bulb temperature phenomenon. Basically, at 95 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees relative humidity, it doesn't matter that you stand in front of a fan blowing air around all day. That temperature and humidity is sufficient to cause your organs to fail in a matter of a few hours. You die. We observed the onset of organ failure while living in Belize. People working outdoors, carpenters in particular, didn't know that they were getting too hot, but it became obvious that they were lacking judgment. They were exhibiting poor judgment with their behavior. They were acting drunk. That's one of the first symptoms that somebody's organs are failing, that they're experiencing lethal wet bulb conditions, is that they have poor judgment, we'll say. They start stumbling around. They can't come up with the words they want. They're carpenters who have been swinging hammers for 20 years and suddenly they can't hit the nail on the head. So, and I wrote and spoke about that quite frequently during that 2+ period that we were living there. So basically, lethal wet bulb temperature means that our bodies can't keep up with the temperature and humidity, and so our organs start to fail. Again, I talked about this in yesterday's video, and there's a peer-reviewed article that came out in Science Advances this year. I don't have the citation right here with me, but it's in my Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored essay, indicating, it's from Science Advances, and it indicates that we have already surpassed lethal wet bulb temperatures in many places around the globe, particularly in tropical and subtropical regions. Again, this is in Science Advances from earlier this year, and of course the press release and the corporate media reporting that went along with it, with the paper, indicated that this was 80 years ahead of schedule, because everything is scheduled to occur in the year 2100, and this is 2020, and people are already dying around the planet as a result of lethal wet bulb temperatures. But we can eat mushrooms, onions, and grow them. Yeah, sure. Listen, I'm not telling people what to do or what to eat, but I have no interest in living on a dead planet, even with canned mushrooms and onions. And you can't grow mushrooms, you can't grow onions, you can't grow onions in dead soil. Onions are heavy feeders. That means that they're a root crop, and they absorb and take up a tremendous amount of nutrients. How are you going to put those nutrients back in the soil? So, soil is dead, nothing will grow. End of story. You are saying it will happen within hours. No, I am not saying that. I don't know how many times I have to say this. I've said it probably 1,000 times. I'm not saying that people will die in a matter of hours. In fact, already in this conversation, I mentioned at least twice the importance of timing. Remember how I mentioned that when the coronavirus started in China, industrial activity was reduced there, but it was early enough in the year that it didn't affect biology and ecology, so we didn't feel the impacts, but we might as of this fall. That's what I'm talking about. The reduction in aerosol masking occurs in a very short period of time, somewhere between a few hours, according to James Hansen, and a few weeks. That's the general consensus among other climate scientists. But we have to work that loss of aerosol masking through the biology of various ecosystems. So, yes, we will lose aerosol masking in a short period of time. No, we will not all die in that same short period of time. Did I miss anything there, Pauline?
No, you're doing good.
Can we do these on Mondays? I don't know. Can we do these on Mondays?
No, we have a Zoom on Monday
Zoom.
in the morning.
Yes, Zoom Monday morning.
Maybe.
Maybe we can do Monday afternoon.
Yeah, Belize is not uninhabited.
No, Belize is not uninhabitable. Belize is perfectly habitable, especially on the coast where you would be visiting, because I assume you're going to be playing a tourist.
Ice cream in a good thing. So, what are some ways people can stay cool if the power goes out?
If the power goes out and you can't run your fan, which doesn't help in a lethal wet bulb situation anyway, you can dip in water. You can, there's those caves. Caves underground.
We don't have caves in Florida.
No, there's no caves here. Well, there probably are. We just don't know where they are.
Well, they're underwater.
When the power goes out in places like this, it becomes very difficult to keep your temperature cool. You can use washcloths and put as cool of water as you can find on a washcloth on your skin, and that evaporation might help a little bit for a while. But again, moving air around with your own personal fan or a floor fan is not going to overcome lethal wet bulb conditions that tear up your organs. It just doesn't work. So find water to dip in, find a cool place. That's all I know. That's why this is so horrible and why the consequences are so bad in tropical and subtropical areas. That's many of those places are lesser developed portions of the globe, and so they have limited access to electricity. So that's bad news for people with respect to the organ failure issue I already talked about.
Do you remember a long time ago, before everybody had air conditioning, if there were heat waves, people would actually go to the shopping mall or to the movies
Right.
to get air conditioning?
Right. I did that a few times
Yeah.
living in Tucson. Went to the movie just to escape my own house because I didn't want to pay $150 a month for air conditioning.
Right. Go to your condo.
I haven't seen anything about the floods in China and the connection to industrial activity. The Three Gorges Dam apparently is threatened, but I've been reading that for a few days and it hasn't been taken out yet. So I don't know what's going on. It's, China is one of those countries very difficult to find out what's actually going on because their totalitarian government has been very effective at preventing information from going around the planet.
And asked about helium. Warn people about helium.
What's the website? The Planetary Exit? Is that the name of it?
Maybe.
No. Exit, emergency exit. Can anybody think of the name of that website where they describe various minimum suffering techniques for suicide? Exit International. That's what it's called. Exit International. So if you're interested in that, that would be the website to pursue. Cities will be harder than rural areas. Yes, cities are hotter. They have higher carbon dioxide concentrations than rural areas. Amy lived for a 10-day heat wave in Philadelphia for 10 days. That's remarkable. Welcome, Jeff Ferguson, and thank you for joining as a climate defender. It will be over 80 degrees in Vancouver all week. Presumably that's Fahrenheit, not Celsius. What about living on the coast? Well, it depends where on the coast. If it's
Florida.
Coastal Canada, that's a fine idea. If it's coastal Rakino Island in New Zealand, that's a fine idea. And it will make temperatures relatively comfortable compared to, say, Florida, the coast of Florida, or Texas for the foreseeable future. But still, the loss of aerosol masking presents a daunting threat because plants will not survive. Even with a very minor change in temperature, and did I quote this paper already? I can't remember things I've said because it's been more than 10 minutes. In a paper released July 31st of this year, July 31st, 2020, in the Proceedings National Academy of Sciences, by Malhotra and colleagues, Malhotra and colleagues, they assessed the response of plant roots to experimental warming in a peat bog ecosystem. And they found that the growth of fine roots in shrubs and trees, the growth of fine roots in woody plants, increased by 130% for each 1 degree Celsius temperature rise. That's amazing. That's really, really enormous increase in plant growth. It sounds like it's a great thing, right? But it's actually the worst possible scenario. Drying will allow replacement of sphagnum moss by other plants and therefore hasten the loss of soil carbon. So that's as a result of a 1 degree Celsius temperature rise locally, and it caused catastrophic abrupt release of or heating of the planet. So again, these what seems like relatively minor changes in temperature locally translate to enormous changes in ecosystem structure and function. So a 1 degree temperature increase affects the peatlands so much that, what's it say again? Drying will allow replacement of sphagnum moss by other plants and hasten the loss of soil carbon. Where's that soil carbon going? That's right, into the atmosphere. That's with a 1 degree temperature increase. And it has an enormous impact on release of greenhouse gases and the survivability of all plants in that system. It's 1 degree. Did those people that got together and drank Kool-Aid and go to the planet Sirius know about aerosol masking effect? I don't understand the question because my grasp of pop culture is not so swift. But almost nobody knows about the aerosol masking effect. Almost nobody. As nearly as I can tell, I'm the only person who is routinely writing and speaking about the aerosol masking effect. And I studied climate change from the early 80s when I was in graduate school and never heard about it until, 2015? No, 2012, I think. Early 2012 I heard about it. So it took me a long time to catch up. And now I've told thousands of people about it in one way or another, and still nobody talks about it. Thank you for your contribution, Fairy Dust. I'll bet that's not your given name. I don't know. Jazz for Peace is an organization that names honorary ambassadors periodically. In the more than 20 years they've been in existence, they have named 4 previous honorary ambassadors, and I became the 5th, along with Howard Zinn and who's the congressman?
Oh.
Dennis Kucinich.
Right.
So, fine company. Thanks for asking the question. And we were scheduled to have some sort of award ceremony in the spring of this year and then in the fall of this year. And I sent those people an email message this morning to no response. So I'm not sure what's going on with it, but apparently I'm a Jazz for Peace honorary ambassador, and so far that doesn't mean a thing. Joey, that's a good question. Being at 2C now, does that mean 1 degree means human extinction? It's all about the rate. It is all about the rate of change. And already the rate of change is outstripping the ability of vertebrates and mammals to keep up. I mentioned this repeatedly in my writing, there's a European group that is looking forward to 2030 and anticipating that we can hold the global average temperature below 1.5 degrees above the 1750 baseline. We're at 2, so that didn't quite pan out. And in this report, authored by Gaub, L. Gaub, G-A-U-B, and others, it is indicated that a 1.5 degree Celsius global average temperature rise would potentially be enough to cause the extinction of humans. And we're at 2. Again, it's all about the lag, the impact on biology, and the consequent impact on our ability to secure food for ourselves and also to keep alive those species that are filtering our water for us. So again, timing is really important here.
So people are talking about the unusual cool regions, and that's the
Yeah,
sloppy.
this is why we call it climate change, not global warming. Although it's a result of overall planetary warming, the effects vary from region to region. So we get the polar express in the wintertime. It makes some places cold and some places warm. Interestingly, this last winter, it was very cold in Florida, and it still is. It's quite cool here. I don't think we've had a 100-degree day Fahrenheit yet, and there have been many of those in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, and also in the New York, New Jersey region in the United States. So there's places in the summertime that typically are cooler than Florida are now warmer than Florida, and during the winter, Florida has been hammered by cold temperatures. So again, it's all about the circulation patterns in the environment, and what happens locally is not necessarily indicative of what's happening globally. Has Pauline strapped gut to his chair or what? Kirsten, you don't have to make a Freudian slip about my stomach, really. And I'm not strapped to the chair. I've actually been allowed out of it a couple of times already today. Hi, Sandy. Okay. So, thanks everybody for participating today, and thanks particularly to the members for your chat messages. And we'll close this out. We'll do this again within approximately a week. We'll put out another survey, right?
Yeah.
Soon.
Yeah.
And determine what's the best time for the majority, which is almost never the best time for me, which is why Pauline has to strap me into this chair to get me to participate. No, she doesn't do that, really. Which continent will be the first to suffer? That's a fine question. The answer is all of them so far. All the continents are experiencing the impact of abrupt, irreversible climate change. Thus far, the tropic and subtropical regions are being most heavily affected. Will that continue? Don't know. All right. I'm going to close this out. Thank you very much, everybody. I did not eat any ice cream cones today. I did not eat any ice cream at all today, Linda. Not any ice cream at all. And thanks for reminding me. That and the comment about my gut remind me that it doesn't matter that I should go eat my ice cream right now, because I'm already fat, apparently, to somebody who thinks I'm strapped into the chair. Again, everybody, thanks for participating, and I look forward to chatting with you in